Hello, this is Head to Head on UATV and I am Eugenia Andriyuk. The fate of Ukrainian political prisoners illegally held in Russia is turning into a matter of international concern. Just last weekend, a rally for the liberation of Ukrainian filmmaker Oleg Sentsov and other political prisoners was held at the Times Square in New York. The European Film Academy has called on people around the world to push for the release of illegally imprisoned Ukrainian director. On June 1st, a show of support and protest under the hashtag #SaveOlegSentsov will be held in different cities around the world, but all the calls and global actions cannot change reality. Oleg Sentsov remains on an indefinite hunger strike, which has lasted for over 2 weeks now. Another Ukrainian citizen illegally detained by Russia, Volodymyr Balukh, has refused food for over 2 months now. So what can be done to free the Kremlin's prisoners? To talk more about this, we welcome to the studio today human rights activist Eugenia Andriyuk. Hello, and thank you for being with us today.
Hello.
So we start with the most important question. What is the health condition of both Oleg Sentsov and Volodymyr Balukh?
It's important to note that also another Ukrainian political prisoner, Alexander Shimkiv, he also has been detained. However, being in Russia, he has been detained. He used to be a part of right sector. However, he was illegally detained. He also has called hunger strike last week, so he's also on hunger strike.
For a week now.
Yesterday, it's also became known that Russian political prisoner not connected with Ukraine, who is detained under so-called case of 26 March. It was 26 March 2017, the huge rally in Russia. He also decided on hunger strike, so probably today is the second or the third day of his hunger strike. So it's interesting that this wave of hunger strikes among political prisoners in Russia, both Ukraine and Russian, is also growing. So regarding Oleg and Volodymyr, unfortunately, as there is no independent access basically of anyone to them, there is also no source of any independent information regarding their health. So the only person who could visit Volodymyr Balukh was his public defender, and he is a priest of Ukrainian church, Clement. So last time when he managed to go in, he said that his health state has deteriorated, and he advised except just taking water, also to have bread and also to have honey, which Vladimir agreed. And nowadays, basically, he also have like just a bit of food as bread and honey, which also he takes very in small portions. However, it's something which basically probably allowed him to stay for 2 months hunger strike. But also, this is a way to avoid the forced feeding, which could be probably done by the administration of prison. And it's the same what is basically the huge fear regarding Oleg Sentsov, that probably he would not take any food. However, probably if his health or life is threatened, then prison could forcibly feed him. And probably if Oleg insists on his hunger strike and go on, it's probably what we could face afterwards in the future. But as we all know, the prison conditions both in Crimea and in the mainland of Russia, where Oleg Sentsov is kept, for sure the state of health has deteriorated. And within these terms, which nowadays they are on hunger strike, probably these changes in their bodies would be something which could not then stop.
Mm-hmm. But Ukrainian medics, you say, they are not allowed to visit those political prisoners, right?
For sure, there is only medical personnel of the prison who is allowed to see and to visit. The only people who could visit them are lawyers.
How much aid is being provided?
Unfortunately, there is nothing which we would know for sure, but what we know from the general information that normally there is no normal medical assistance, neither in Simferopol nor in other prisons. There is And if Oleg, he used to be for some time in the medical facility, while Volodymyr is normally in his cell and there is no medical assistance which is provided. So unfortunately, I'm quite pessimistic on that no normal medical assistance is provided to them and no one would be allowed to come in.
Mm-hmm. So Russia is basically ignoring all the calls of Ukraine's Ministry of Foreign Affairs to allow Ukrainian doctors and access to
Unfortunately,
Ukrainian
yes,
prisoners.
and probably as within the regime of this object, I mean, they would reject that. They would say that it's not allowed by law. So those who could visit Agek, except his attorney, is Ukrainian counsel. And I myself hope, because I know that Minister of Foreign Affairs usually they doing a lot to visit all the Ukrainian political prisoners who are in the mainland of Russia, because to Crimea, for sure, Ukrainian consuls do not have any access. So that's why I think the next step, and I'm sure that Minister of Foreign Affairs are working on that, to have now a representative of Ukrainian state, like Ukrainian diplomats, to visit Agek in prison.
Previously, it was unveiled that Volodymyr Palach was tortured in a detention center in Crimea. Is it known how the situation is developing now about Volodymyr Palach, about Oleg Sentsov and other political prisoners?
What we know about Vladimir Palach is that he's quite systematically put in so-called like fine cell, so like for sanctions cell, which is very small in size.
The solitary confinement that he's staying alone.
Exactly. And what for the last time I've heard from his like lawyers and attorneys that basically in Simferopol CISO, because he is like in queue for the solitary confinement, because like the number of prisoners who somehow like violate laws or whom administration want to punish is so high that people are forced to wait to be imprisoned for another 3 days. So what I've heard that it's quite systematically practiced to Vladimir, and unfortunately he is quite regularly put in solitary confinement. But once again, there is like no independent normal information of what is going on with him.
But although he was already sentenced, he's still staying in a detention center. Right?
Yeah, because there is another sentence, another criminal sentence, and another criminal case pending against Vladimir Palach, and this case is connected against so-called attack on the director of the detention center. And according to the administration, they say that Vladimir Palach himself attacked the director of detention center, which is, I mean, I could not even see how it could be possible, while according to Vladimir and his defense, the situation was vice versa. It was the director of the detention center who attacked and beaten Vladimir. While this criminal case is open and investigation still going, there is now a court process against Vladimir. This is the second criminal case. That's why he's still kept in detention center.
And what about Sentsov?
He is in prison, so as he has his serving his sentence, so he's in prison, which is the most problematic, that is very much far away. So it's the northern, like the far northern regions of Russia, and this also what is the difficulty to reach him, both as simply with the letters and with correspondence, but also to visit him. So, and once again, as the access to Oleg Sentsov is very difficult, and he himself being such a man that he would never admit that he has some difficulties or problems, so he himself never reports that he has some problems with administration of prison. So that's why there is no information what is the actual, whether he's tortured or not, what is the actual attitude. But what we know that his hunger strike has been officially registered by the administration of prison, that he used to be put in medical facility center for some times. However, what is generally the attitude of prison to him, what is generally his state of health, unfortunately all that is unknown, and we could get this information only from some letters or from lawyers or from Ukrainian diplomats. His attorney has been last week in Kiev, and he reported what he have seen while visiting Oleg Sentsov for the last time. But once again, there is like no precise information how it is for Oleg Sentsov to be there.
Well, we have also another famous Ukrainian political prisoner held illegally in Russia, Ukrainian journalist Roman Sushchenko, and Russian prosecutors just recently have asked the Moscow City Court to sentence him to 14 years of imprisonment. He's accused of alleged espionage. We all know about this. What is the current situation with Roman Sushchenko?
Unfortunately, there is also quite few information what is known behind. I would say that for us, this like call from the prosecutors, the demand of prosecutor on the term was quite, I mean, unexpected. At least I expected much shorter term, not 14 years. And from our experience, what we know that very often the courts unfortunately agree with the prosecutor's office. Perhaps the final sentence of the court could be several months shorter or several months longer. But unfortunately, normally the court, I mean, there is no normal independent fair trial proceedings which would go on around the whole trial. That's why probably there is around the real term which would be to final to Roman, which would be on the final sentence. And that's why here, in the same way as with all other political prisoners, the only hope is basically exchange of prisoners and the political will of Russia to release political prisoners.
But in past we had some success cases about release of Ukrainian prisoners, a few ones.
Yeah.
So how could we work on these cases remaining now?
Unfortunately, those cases which we used to have, it's case-by-case situations without any systematic approach. So I would remind that the last successful cases, it was the release of Artem Chegos and Irmi Umerov. They both are deputies heads of Majlis, of Crimean Tatars people, which is self-representing body, and it was done with the facilitation of the president of Turkey, Recep Erdogan, and this was like the political act. So unfortunately, what we see in the future is in the same way. One way is to have this case-by-case situations, when either with the facilitation of the politicians of foreign states, and it could be either Turkey or, however, we hope very much for the countries of European Union. Nowadays there is hope that probably Germany would intervene with Oleg Sentsov case and they could advocate on his release. However, indeed there is many other actors and stakeholders who are involved. So there is like one situation, another situation is exchange of prisoners, exchange of those Russian citizens which are detained and kept here in Ukraine in exchange of political prisoners that Russia is keeping. But there's also the strange situation with all this like case-by-case exchanges, because with with exchange and release of some political prisoners, then the next day Russia would detain another one.
What is the situation now in Crimea about human rights and political imprisonment? Is the situation deteriorating, or is there some kind of silence?
Unfortunately, for the last week, the situation has deteriorated seriously. We have new 3 criminal cases, politically motivated criminal cases in Crimea.
Just in 1 week.
Only last week, 2 of them are activists. One is a leader of Crimean Solidarity movement. It is a movement of support of the families of political prisoners, Server Mustafayev, and he has been detained under the accusation of terrorist activities. Another one is an activist who also was visiting the different court proceedings and was helping. And the third is the Ukrainian citizen Alexander Stishenko. He was detained at the administrative border. He lives in Kharkiv, and he has been detained at the administrative border, and for more than 2 weeks no one knew where he was. And only one time the Russian Federal Security Service confirmed his detention. After that they refused it, and last week we've seen it's just in the news video in Russian TV channels where this guy Alexander Stishenko, where he says that he has been a part of the criminal group which was organized by Mustafa Dzhemilev, the leader of Crimean Tatars, who is now in exile here in Kiev, and that he was within the group who organized attack on the part of some pro-Russian people in Crimea. So this is like new three criminal cases. And one more incident last week, there was the abduction of Crimean Tatar activist. And he was abducted by the people in the form of the traffic police, and then afterwards for several hours he was beaten and he was detained by them. After that he was released. However, no official explanation, no official information was provided either to detainee or to his attorneys and to his family. So unfortunately, this is quite scary tendency, and I do hope we always, within each new detention, we hope that this is the last one. Yeah. And I do hope that at least maybe before World Cup, which would be held in Russia, despite all the protest, however, that there would be no new detentions and no new such serious cases.
Well, the comments you delivered are very sad, but let's hope that the international outrage will help Ukraine to release our political prisoners. And thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you.
This was Eugenia Andriyuk, human rights activist. Thank you for watching Head to Head, and stay tuned with UATV.